I always thought betrayal would hit me like a thunderclap, but instead, it came softly, like the sound of leather sliding across the hardwood floor. Daniel's wallet had slipped from his pocket when he stumbled half asleep into bed, reeking faintly of whiskey and something sweeter, something that was not mine. At first, I bent down only to put it back on the nightstand, but then it gaped open and the corner of something shiny caught my eye. My heart gave a single violent thud, the kind that makes you dizzy, the kind that whispers look closer even when you know you should not. I pulled it out slowly, and there it was, sitting in my palm under the dim bedroom light like a live grenade. A foil packet, men's protection. Not one, but several stacked neatly as if waiting their turn. My breath caught in my throat. Married 7 years, Daniel had never carried these for us. We barely used anything at all. He was the man who swore he hated condoms, said they killed the mood, said I was his only woman. Yet here it was undeniable sitting heavy in my hand. Most wives might have screamed, some would have shaken their husbands awake, others might have cried until morning. But me, I stared at that small foil packet, and instead of tears, something else spread through me. It was a slow, burning smile. My lips curled upward even as my eyes stung. Because at that very moment, I realized 2 things. First, my husband was cheating, and second, fate had handed me the perfect weapon. All those nights he told me I was paranoid. All those times he grabbed my wrist too tightly, when I dared to question him, all the gaslighting and cold silences and slammed doors, they all converged into this single glittering piece of evidence. He thought he was clever hiding it in his wallet like a teenage boy sneaking around behind his parents. He thought I was too naive, too obedient, too afraid to see the truth. But he had underestimated me. As I held that packet, an idea as wild as it was wicked bloomed in my mind. A plan so sharp it almost scared me, but at the same time thrilled me in a way I had not felt in years. Revenge, poetic and merciless, whispered itself into my ear. I would not scream. I would not beg. I would not play the broken victim. No, I would smile. I would prepare. And when the time came, Daniel would learn that the woman he had dismissed, insulted and controlled, was capable of turning his secret pleasure into his most unforgettable pain. The smile stayed on my lips long after I slid the wallet back where it had fallen, but inside my chest my heart thrashed like a trapped bird. Suspicion was not new to me. It had been dripping into my veins for months like a slow poison. Daniel's late nights at the office, the mysterious work dinners, the cologne I did not recognize clinging to his shirt. All of it had scratched at my mind until I nearly drove myself mad. Each time I confronted him, he would look at me with those cold gray eyes and twist the knife deeper with words meant to gaslight me. You are imagining things, Megan. Stop being dramatic. You know I work hard for us. Why would you accuse me of such ugliness? Then he would slam his fist on the table or seize my wrist hard enough to leave purple marks that I had to hide under long sleeves. The next morning, he would act as if nothing had happened, as if the bruises were only in my head, as if my reality could be erased by his denial. And then there was Margaret, my dear mother-in-law, always ready to reinforce his narrative. She never missed an opportunity to remind me that a wife's duty was to keep her husband satisfied, that if he strayed it was because I was failing. Her voice, sharp and righteous, echoed through every family gathering. Daniel deserves better. Megan, you must try harder. Even at church, she would glare at me as though my sin was not existing but not being enough for her precious son. I learned to swallow my anger, to lower my head to survive in silence. But the suspicion never left. It grew every time Daniel shut his phone screen when I walked into the room, every time he returned home with excuses so thin they could not cover the contempt in his tone. Once, when I dared to pick up his jacket from the floor, I smelled a perfume so sugary it made me gag. He claimed it was from a secretary who hugged him goodbye after a work function, a harmless gesture nothing to worry about. And when I pressed further, his hand lashed out not to strike my face, but to grip my chin so tightly I tasted blood in my mouth. He hissed that if I ever questioned him again, I would regret it. That night, I locked myself in the bathroom and cried until dawn, staring at my reflection and wondering how the bright girl I once was had become this trembling shell. My friends had stopped calling long ago because Daniel convinced them I was too busy, too fragile, too unavailable. He cut me off slowly, piece by piece, until my world shrank to the walls of our house and the moods of one man. Yet even in that prison, my suspicion grew louder. His work schedule made no sense. His bank statements showed charges at hotels he claimed were business-related. Once, I found a receipt for dinner for two at a place I had begged him to take me, but he always refused, saying it was too expensive. And still, I held back. I doubted myself, because that is what gaslighting does. It makes you believe you are the crazy one, that you are wrong, even when the evidence screams otherwise. I convinced myself to endure to wait for something undeniable. And that night, fate delivered. The condoms in his wallet were not just proof. They were the final straw that snapped the fragile rope I had been dangling from. They tied every loose suspicion into a tight knot of truth. I remembered the way he laughed when I told him once that I worried about him cheating. He had pulled me close, kissed my forehead, and whispered, "Megan, you are all I will ever want." I clung to those words like a lifeline. But they were lies, polished and poisonous, meant only to keep me obedient. The irony was brutal. He thought he was hiding so well, and yet the universe betrayed him with the simplest slip, a wallet tumbling to the floor. I replayed every insult, every bruise, every lonely night while he claimed to be working late. And in those memories, I felt my suspicion harden into something else, something sharper than fear. For the first time in years, I felt control stirring inside me. This was no longer about doubt, it was about certainty. The man I married was not only unfaithful, but cruel, manipulative, violent. The mother who raised him was complicit. Together they had tried to break me, to convince me I was worthless. But as I stood there in the dim bedroom holding the shiny evidence of his betrayal, I knew the game was changing. My suspicion had been the prelude. Now came the act where I stopped questioning myself and began preparing for war. The night the truth fully unraveled began with silence, so heavy I could hear the tick of the old clock on the wall. Daniel had passed out after another late return, the stink of alcohol seeping through the sheets, his snores filling the dark. I moved quietly, careful not to wake him, and reached for the wallet once more, needing to be certain that what I had seen earlier was real and not some cruel trick of my imagination. My fingers closed around the leather, and when I flipped it open under the thin glow of the lamp, the foil packets were still there, stacked like damning evidence in a courtroom. My throat tightened. There was no denying it now. My husband was not only unfaithful, he was bold enough to carry his betrayal with him into our home, into our bed, as if I were too blind or too stupid to ever notice. I should have stopped there, but something pushed me further. I reached for his phone, tucked beneath the pillow like a weapon he wanted hidden. For months, he had guarded it as if it contained state secrets, never letting it out of his sight. Taking it into the shower, turning it face down at dinner. My pulse pounded as I entered the passcode I had memorized from stolen glances. The screen unlocked, and what I found made my stomach lurch. At first, it looked ordinary folders named Work Banking Finances, but buried beneath was one that did not belong. The icon was plain forgettable, the kind of thing you would never tap twice. Inside was an encrypted chat app I had never seen before. My thumb trembled as I pressed it, and instantly the screen lit with a thread of messages from someone named Vanessa. Her profile picture was coy, a cropped shot of glossy lips painted red. I scrolled, and the words hit me like blades. "Can't wait for our next night, baby. You're so much better than that boring wife of yours. You deserve someone who knows how to please you." My vision blurred as I read further. Hotel reservations, photos, descriptions of things that twisted my stomach into knots. Daniel's words filled with lust and contempt, written with the ease of a man who had done this many times. I felt my hands shake, but still I scrolled, torturing myself with every cruel detail. Then I saw a line that nearly made me drop the phone. "Don't worry, Vanessa, she'll never know. I've been drugging her with a little something in her milk so she sleeps through everything. That's how I get away." My knees buckled and I clutched the bed frame to keep from collapsing. So, it was not just betrayal. It was calculated cruelty. He had been slipping something into my drinks, ensuring I stayed unconscious while he slithered off to her. Every headache, every sudden drowsiness I had blamed on stress now made horrifying sense. I stared at the glowing screen bile rising in my throat. Daniel was not only cheating, he was drugging me, turning me into a prisoner in my own home. The final piece of my suspicion slammed into place, and rage burned through my veins like fire. My husband had treated me like a fool, like property, like a burden he could light a gaslight, bruise, and sedate at will. And his mother had stood by his side, smiling, blaming me for not being good enough. The betrayal was total, suffocating, but instead of breaking me, it hardened me. I looked at the condoms again, then at the chat messages filled with mockery, and something inside me shifted. My fear, my shame, my endless questioning of my own reality, all of it cracked apart, leaving only a clear, cutting purpose. I would not scream at him. I would not beg. I would not confront him in the middle of the night while he was too drunk to even register my pain. No, I would plan. I would turn every ounce of his arrogance against him. He thought I was blind, but I had seen. He thought I was weak, but I had endured. He thought he could play his game forever, but the rules were about to change. And when they did, he would learn what it felt like to be powerless, humiliated, destroyed. I set the phone back, returned the wallet, and crawled beneath the sheets beside his oblivious form. My face calm, but my mind ablaze with strategy. Discovery had broken the last chain he held over me. The evidence was in my hands, undeniable, and with it came freedom. I closed my eyes and whispered into the dark. You will regret underestimating me, Daniel. You and your precious Vanessa. You and the mother who taught you to despise women. By morning, I was no longer the wife who doubted herself. I was the woman who had seen the truth, and from that moment forward, I was the woman who would make them pay. The plan began with a calmness that surprised even me. I woke the next morning to Daniel's gruff command for coffee, the usual sneer in his voice as though I were his servant and not his wife. But inside, I felt strangely steady. I poured his cup, set it before him, and let my lips curve into a soft smile he did not deserve. He grunted, suspicious, but said nothing. He never imagined that behind that smile was the beginning of his undoing. When he left for work, I retrieved the wallet again. My fingers moved quickly, replacing every shiny packet of protection with ones I had carefully doctored. The glue oozed into the latex, invisible but merciless, and as I resealed them, my hands trembled, not with fear, but with anticipation. Each packet became a tiny trap, a silent promise that his pleasure would become his punishment. I returned them to the wallet and set it exactly where I had found it. For the rest of the day, I played my role. Megan, the obedient wife. Megan, the naive. Megan, the fool. I cleaned. I cooked. I asked about his meetings, nodding at every lie as though it were truth. But behind my eyes, fire burned. I knew he was planning to meet her that night. I heard the phone buzz with Vanessa's name, saw the way he shielded the screen from me, and caught his smirk when he thought I was not watching. He left around 10, claiming he had urgent work, the same tired excuse he had used 100 times. This time I let him go with a kiss on his cheek. "Drive safe, Daniel." I whispered, my voice syrupy sweet, and he smirked as if he had fooled me once more. I waited, pacing the house in silence until my phone buzzed with an alert from the ride app I had secretly linked to his account. Destination Downtown Hotel. My lips curled. The trap was in motion. Hours later, the night split open with a message from an unknown number. "Megan, you should come." Something happened. My heart thumped, but not with fear. I already knew. I dressed quickly and hailed a cab, arriving at the hospital just as 2 paramedics wheeled Daniel and Vanessa inside. The sight was almost surreal. Daniel's face was pale, his jaw clenched in agony. Vanessa's eyes were wide with panic, her hands clutching at a blanket pulled high across her chest. They were stuck together, bound by the very thing he had thought would keep me ignorant. Nurses whispered. Orderlies stifled laughter. One man pulled out his phone to record, and I did not stop him. The humiliation spread like wildfire, burning through the sterile halls of the emergency ward. I walked slowly toward them, each step measured, savoring the scene. Daniel's eyes widened when he saw me, horror flashing across his features. "Megan," he rasped, but I tilted my head, my smile sharp as a blade. "Working late again?" His face twisted, but he could say nothing. Vanessa whimpered beside him, begging for relief as doctors rushed them through swinging doors. I stood in the corridor, calm as stone, listening to the whispers ripple around me. Everyone knew. Everyone saw. By the time they emerged, hours later separated but broken, the video had already spread online. Viral. A cheating husband and his mistress glued together in the most humiliating way possible. By morning, the whole city would know his name. I drove home ahead of him, sat at the kitchen table, and waited. At dawn, he limped through the door, eyes bloodshot, movements stiff. He froze when he saw me waiting, a mug of coffee steaming before me. I smiled again, the same smile I had worn when I first found the evidence. Long night. He tried to bluster, to spin another lie, but his voice cracked. His body betrayed his pain. I watched him struggle, savoring the cracks forming in the armor of arrogance he had worn for years. Revenge. Phase 1 was complete. The man who had gaslighted me, bruised me, drugged me, and betrayed me had tasted his first dose of humiliation, and it was only the beginning. The humiliation at the hospital should have been enough to break him, but Daniel was too arrogant to admit defeat, and Margaret was too determined to shield her golden boy from consequences. When the whispers began in our neighborhood, when coworkers started smirking behind his back, Margaret stormed into our house with fire in her eyes. She pointed a trembling finger at me and spat accusations that dripped with venom. "You set him up, Megan. You poisoned his marriage. A good wife doesn't drive her husband into the arms of another woman." My chest ached at her audacity, but I bit back my laughter. Instead, I looked her in the eye and asked calmly, "Do you really want to see what your son has been doing?" She blinked, thrown off balance, but still puffed her chest. "He is a man. Megan, men have needs. It is your duty to forgive." I left her standing in the kitchen and retrieved the folder I had been building for weeks. Screenshots of messages, hotel receipts, photos pulled from his hidden apps, even the medical report from the hospital incident. I dropped the stack onto the table in front of her. For the first time in my marriage, Margaret's confidence faltered. Her eyes darted over the evidence, the blood draining from her face as she realized this was not gossip or rumor, but undeniable truth. She looked up at me, lips trembling, and whispered, "How could he be so careless?" And then, like the coward she was, she tried to twist it again, saying, "I should have kept it private, that airing such things would destroy the family name." I leaned close and hissed, "The family name destroyed itself the moment your son laid hands on me and laughed while betraying me." From that moment, Margaret's power over me cracked. I sent copies of the evidence to every relative who had ever looked down on me at family dinners. Cousins, aunts, uncles, even the pastor who always praised Daniel's devotion. One by one, their calls came, their voices sharp with judgment, not toward me, but toward him. Margaret's voice grew quieter in church, her posture smaller, her reputation stained by the truth she could no longer control. Meanwhile, Daniel came crawling back, eyes bloodshot, voice hoarse, insisting we could fix this, if only I forgave him. He promised therapy, promised to change, but his words rang hollow. Every promise was just another lie, every tear just another manipulation. I let him grovel, let him clutch at my hands, but I never softened. Instead, I watched as the weight of social shame crushed him. He could no longer enter a room without feeling eyes on him. He could not attend family dinners without whispers snaking through the air. His arrogance, once towering, began to crumble into pitiful excuses. Revenge. Phase 2 was not about glue or traps. It was about stripping away the facade he and his mother had built, about exposing the rot beneath the shiny exterior. For years, I had been the one humiliated, silenced, told I was unworthy. Now it was their turn to taste the bitterness of shame, and it was only going to get worse. Daniel thought humiliation would fade if he kept his head down, but he underestimated me. I was no longer the frightened wife he could silence with a glare or a bruising grip. I had gathered every shred of evidence, cataloged every bruise, every receipt, every vile message. When I walked into the lawyer's office clutching the folder, I felt lighter than I had in years. My attorney, a sharp woman with eyes like steel, flipped through the documents and nodded slowly. "Megan," she said, "we can take everything." The divorce papers were drawn up within days, and when Daniel was served, he roared like a wounded animal. He threw the papers across the room and accused me of betrayal, as if my demand for justice was equal to his years of deceit. Margaret rushed to his defense, her shrill voice echoing through the house, calling me ungrateful wicked, a destroyer of family. But this time I did not cower. I stared her down and reminded her that her son's name was already smeared across the internet thanks to his little hospital adventure. She blanched, the fight draining from her face, and I knew I had finally stolen the power she had lorded over me for so long. The court date arrived, and with it a storm of anticipation. The gallery was filled, whispers running wild about the scandal. Daniel arrived in a pressed suit that could not hide the limp in his step, his arrogance brittle but unbroken. Margaret sat behind him, clutching her rosary, glaring at me with all the fury of a woman who knew she had already lost. I took the stand with my lawyer by my side, my voice steady as I described years of manipulation, the gaslighting that made me doubt my sanity, the bruises hidden under sweaters, the pills slipped into my drinks. Gasps rippled through the courtroom when the chat logs were displayed on the screen. Vanessa's crude words. Daniel's admissions, the plan to sedate me so he could escape. And then came the video. Grainy but clear, filmed on a cell phone in the hospital, showing Daniel and Vanessa being wheeled through the corridor, stuck together, faces twisted in agony and humiliation. The gallery erupted. Some laughed outright, others covered their mouths in shock, but all eyes turned to Daniel, and in that moment, his mask shattered. He slammed his fist on the table, shouting that it was fake that I had set him up, but his voice cracked desperation leaking through every word. The judge's gavel pounded, calling for order, and my lawyer coolly presented the medical report that confirmed what the world had already seen. Vanessa herself appeared via subpoena, her testimony reluctant but damning, admitting the affair, admitting Daniel's schemes, and in the end turning on him to save herself. Margaret tried to intervene, shouting that her son was being framed, but the judge silenced her with a warning. When the verdict came, it was swift and merciless. I was granted full custody of the house, the savings, the assets. Daniel was ordered to cover all debts, including the staggering hospital bills. His reputation, already shredded, now carried the weight of legal condemnation. I walked out of that courtroom with the sun on my face, the sound of Daniel's curses chasing me, but powerless to touch me. Revenge. Case 3 was not just about private satisfaction. It was about making his downfall public, undeniable, permanent. The man who once believed he could drug me, cheat me, control me, and laugh while doing it, was now the one stripped bare, his power gone, his future crumbling. And I was only just beginning to breathe again. Losing in court should have been the end, but Daniel was a man who could not accept defeat. His job let him go within a week, citing the scandal as a breach of company values. The viral video had spread beyond our city, picked up by gossip blogs and late-night comedians. Everywhere he turned, there were whispers, laughter, pitying glances that cut deeper than knives. Vanessa, once his escape, vanished as quickly as she had appeared. I heard through mutual acquaintances that she told him he was ruined, a loser she would not tether herself to. Margaret withdrew from her social circles too, no longer boasting about her perfect son. The church ladies stopped inviting her to luncheons, neighbors crossed the street to avoid her, and the air of superiority she once wore like a crown crumbled into ashes. But Daniel did not disappear quietly. He showed up one night at my doorstep, his face gaunt, his clothes wrinkled, eyes wild with desperation. He pounded on the door until the hinges shook, shouting my name, demanding that I open up and talk like adults. I watched through the peephole, my hand steady on the phone, already dialing the police. He cursed, he begged, he threatened, his voice a storm of contradictions. When I refused to open the door, his fury escalated. He smashed a flower pot against the siding, tore at the doorframe, screamed that I had destroyed his life and that he would not leave without taking something back. By the time the flashing lights arrived, he was throwing patio chairs into the yard, his voice hoarse with rage. The officers pulled him down, cuffed him while he spat, and kicked a pitiful image of the man who once strutted through rooms as though he owned them. Watching from behind the curtain, I felt no fear, only a cold certainty that the universe had delivered him exactly where he belonged. He was charged with harassment and property damage, his bail set high thanks to his mounting debts. Margaret's pleas fell on deaf ears, the community too tired of her excuses, the system finally recognizing the pattern of abuse I had lived with for years. Daniel's spiral was complete, jobless, penniless, abandoned, and now behind bars. For years, he had painted me as the weak one, the hysterical wife, the unworthy partner. Now he was the broken man reduced to whispers in the county jail. The final twist was not dramatic flames or a violent climax. It was quiet, devastating justice. The man who had thrived on control had lost every shred of it undone, not by my fists, but by my resolve, my patience, and his own arrogance. And as he disappeared into the system he once thought untouchable, I closed the door behind me with a steady hand and the unshakable knowledge that his downfall was complete. When the dust finally settled, the house that had once felt like a prison began to feel like my own sanctuary. I walked through each room, slowly touching the walls, breathing in the silence that no longer vibrated with Daniel's temper or Margaret's scorn. The bruises on my wrists had faded, but the memories remained ghosts whispering of every night I had doubted my worth. Yet with each sunrise those ghosts grew quieter, replaced by something stronger, steadier. I was not broken. I was not foolish. I had survived, and more than that, I had won. The neighbors who once pitied me now nodded with respect. Some even stopped to tell me they admired my strength, that they wished they had acted when they suspected what I endured. I learned to accept their words not as validation, but as reminders that silence only serves the abuser. My lawyer finalized the paperwork, the property officially mine, the debts officially his. For the first time in years, my bank account belonged only to me, no longer drained by his secret hotel stays or hidden gifts to Vanessa. At night, I slept without fear of being drugged, without listening for the creak of the front door closing as he snuck out. I slept deeply peacefully as a woman free. Margaret avoided me, but even her absence was a gift. Without her constant criticisms, the air felt lighter, the walls less heavy. Sometimes I imagined her sitting alone in her dark house, replaying every moment she defended her son, only to watch him crumble. That was her penance, and I no longer carried the weight of it. Healing did not come all at once. There were mornings I woke shaking dreams of his voice telling me I was worthless, still echoing in my ears. But I learned to stand in front of the mirror and remind myself that I was more than his lies. I found new routines, new laughter, new friends who reminded me what it felt like to be seen as more than a shadow of a man's ego. Slowly, I stitched myself back together, not as the Megan who had once cowered, but as a Megan who knew her own power. One evening, I sat on the porch, the sun dipping below the horizon, the air warm and calm, and I thought of all the women still trapped where I had been. Women who believed their bruises were their fault, who thought their doubts were madness, who stayed silent because their abuser convinced them silence was safety. My story was not just mine anymore. It was a reminder that justice sometimes needs help seeing clearly that strength can bloom in the ashes of humiliation. I lifted my glass of wine to the darkening sky and whispered to the universe, I am free. And to those still waiting for courage, I wanted to say, you are not crazy. You are not weak, and you are not alone. Sometimes revenge is survival, sometimes survival is revenge, and sometimes the sweetest justice is walking away whole, while those who try to destroy you crumble into nothing.